And later in the program, we'll be joined by the President's Special Advisor on Information on Strategy, Bayo Onanuga. But first, how are Africa's 54 nations being governed? Which ones are improving and which ones seem to be declining? These are some of the big themes covered by the 2024 Mo Ibrahim Index of African Governance, which gathers and analyzes data from across the continent. It looks at the last 10 years and compares it to the data in 2014. And the findings suggest there's been stagnation in government, very slow progress there, and deterioration in some key areas, particularly safety and security, with an increasing number of conflicts and more violent deaths. It's all put together by the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, set up by the Sudanese British billionaire Dr. Mo Ibrahim. So where does Nigeria fit in to this new governance report? Well, for more on this, I'm joined now on the line from Port Harcourt by the Country Director of Amnesty International, Issa Sanusi, and here in the studio by the Current Affairs Analyst and Dean of the School of Postgraduate Studies at Bayes University, Abuja, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. And we had to sort of bring you in because Mr. Onanuga was running a bit late, so I hope that didn't sort of, push you out of joint too much. He will be joining us later, but let me start with you in Port Harcourt, Mr. Sanusi. The Mo Ibrahim Foundation, which you're very familiar with, has released its 2024 report on governance in Africa. It's not a very pretty picture, is it?
Yeah, it's a very grim, very shocking, but not surprising outcome because we know what has been happening, and all the indices, all the statistics that we have clearly support what the findings of this report. And we definitely know that in the last a decade and more than a decade, we have been experiencing deterioration in terms of the living standard of the people, democratic institutions, as well as security. When you look at the whole report itself, it has pointed out some few countries out of 54 that made a significant progress. And it is so unfortunate that only a few countries were able to make that kind of progress. And we are witnessing what the report called an overall stagnation. And this is really a very disturbing development because Africa is very populous and our demography is full of young people. And unfortunately, the institutions of governance are failing people every day, and governance is not working to improve the lives of people, but creating bureaucracies, creating problems, deterioration of living condition of the people, increasing poverty, coupled with conflicts. And this is something that should worry everyone because Africa has all the resources. We have the resources, we have the human capital, and we have the potential. So why are we not making progress? And the reason, as this report has pointed out, is because our governance is poor. We only have very strong people with very weak institutions, and we have a situation whereby when people find themselves in power, they don't think beyond themselves and the people around them. They only think that the world begins and ends around them, and everything has to revolve around them. And that is why we have the poverty, we have the insecurity, we have a right in our sight. And we are witnessing a very historical country like Sudan collapsing, going into chaos, and within some weeks, the whole country has now almost collapsed and is now a failed state. And similar thing happened to Somalia some years ago. And this is very shocking because we thought after Somalia there wouldn't be anything like that. Unfortunately, we are witnessing it in Sudan. And this report is a wake-up call for all Africans and African leaders to think twice ahead of everything so that we will not continue to have a record of producing failed states, weak states, that are incapable of protecting the people, incapable of bringing prosperity, and incapable of building a modern society in tandem with all the indices of progress in the 21st century.
Well, we're going to come back to you in a minute, Mr. Sanusi, but let me come to you, Professor Adeniyi. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. It's interesting that Mr. Sanusi there was talking about Sudan. That is, of course, where Mo Ibrahim comes from, and that's well, he's a British Sudanese sort of dual citizen, and that's you know, where he originally comes from, and that's a country that, as Mr. Sanusi said, appears to be collapsing in terms of, you know, governance and of course security and so on. And according to the Mo Ibrahim Foundation report, there was a marked deterioration in safety and security, and that was one big driver of the deterioration of the governance score, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Apart from, and there are also for others, there's human development, there's the sphere of economy. But I think overall, the report was very comprehensive, and it brought out some indices around which, you know, some variables were compared, you know. And it's important to first of all state that those variables are not particularly peculiar to Africa. There are things that we can find around the world, but Africa is unfortunate, you know, because the weaknesses of those variables, you know, are strong enough to prevent us from growing, considering how weak our institutions also are. And beyond that, as well, you will see that there were some pointers, you know, some silver linings. There are some countries that are doing well, according to the report. For instance, Seychelles, you know, has overtaken Mauritius, irrespective of the general weaknesses of development in our development potentials, you know. Then, of course, Comoros continue to decline, and of course there are some warning signs around some countries, Nigeria inclusive, Rwanda also inclusive. And if you look at those warning signs, you find credibility in them. For instance, around parlor state of the economy, you know, weakness of you know, the problems around insecurity, which, like you said, you know, is not enabling economy to thrive. You know, but overall, I think the case of Sierra Leone is also peculiar. Cote d'Ivoire is also peculiar. But the commonality that we'll find from the report is the weakness of the institutions, like my colleague also identified. Because of the weakness of institutions, we have individuals in this African continent, you know, assuming the role of these institutions. And when we have that kind of situation, you cannot guarantee stability and sustainability, which the report is asking us to be mindful of. And what is to be done in the circumstance is for us to emphasize the place of leadership that can be sacrificial, leadership that will prioritize the interest of the community more than their own personal, family, or the interest of their associates and friends, as the case could be.
Indeed, and coming back to you in Port Harcourt, Mr. Sanusi, I mean, there was also mentioned, I think you perhaps touched on it briefly, the shrinking of the civic space and the rights of citizens and democracy. This was another driver that led to deterioration in governance in at least half the countries in Africa. But just to go along the track that Professor Adeniyi was going there, on the positive side, the index recorded reasonable development in infrastructure, social, political, and women's rights, as well as marginal improvements in healthcare in a few countries. So some areas of development.
Yeah, we have to recognize that some countries, for example, in the report, there was a mention of Morocco, and definitely everyone and all of us are witnesses or may have an idea of the kind of progress that Morocco is making. But this is not something that just happened out of the blues. It is a product of effort. It is a product of commitment. No country will develop without those commitments. No country will develop without that dedication from the leaders. I have this idea, and I always believe in that idea, that any country that you see deteriorating or going backward or becoming a failed state, is not becoming a failed state because of the people. It's becoming a failed state because the leaders of that country are irresponsible. I believe that leadership is everything. If you have a good leadership, you will make progress. If you don't have a good leadership, you are bound to deteriorate, because people are always bound to trust and respect and dedicate themselves, commit themselves to people that they identify as sincere and committed to their well-being. Therefore, I believe that the reason why we are where we are for some countries is because of lack of leadership. And you mentioned the issue of the civic space, and this is what organizations like ours have been talking about, because there is no way you can make progress when people are afraid to express themselves, when people are around important personalities but they can't tell them the truth, because doing so will put them in the bad books. We have a situation whereby, some time ago, some women came out in Nigeria and protested against hunger in Mina, Niger State. They were arrested. Similar case happened in Kano. The women were arrested. Therefore, these are the kind of things that generate a lot of anger and make people to lose hope in the institutions of governance. And that actually brings me back to the point that was made in this report about institutions. We need to begin pushing, and I hope that our leaders will be responsible enough to start committing themselves to this. We need to be investing heavily, and we have to be pushing that our authorities, our governments must work towards building institutions, so that anybody who came, people can come and go, and that is how life is. So after every person comes and go, we are still going to have strong institutions. If we have hospitals, they will continue functioning, whoever is the chief medical officer. If we have a country, the country will continue to prosper, because there are institutions, there are rules that nobody, not even the president, not even anybody, can be able to change the system or manipulate the system to favor himself or his family. Therefore, we have to start. But I believe that for us to achieve these things, the people have to demand for these things. I don't think people can get this good governance that we are talking about without demanding for it. If people continue to think that they just sit down and watch things, they watch their living standard deteriorating, they are becoming impoverished every day, and institutions are not working for their own good, and they think that that is how life will continue, they will continue to live in poverty and penury that will be endless. Therefore, I believe that this kind of report is a wake-up call for the people across Africa to rise, to make their voices heard, to demand their rights peacefully, and to demand for good governance. Where there is no sanitation, you have to make it happen. Where there is no water, you have to demand for it, you have to work towards it, because if not, nobody will give you water. Where there are no roads, you have to demand for them, and you have to make that demand very strongly, so that the people in charge will know that you have no reason to compromise about these demands, because you are human beings, you are not animals, and you need standard of living to continue to live your lives. And I believe that that is the only way forward for African countries. And I believe that historically, if you look at the trajectory of every developed country, their development started from people's demand for good governance. We have to demand for it, and we have to get it no matter the cost.
Okay, well, let's just pick up on some of the the index's ranking of some of the countries that are doing well and better, Professor Adeniyi. And Côte d'Ivoire, or Ivory Coast, is picked out as a star performer and as something of a locomotive for West Africa, with an improving economy, especially after the difficult times they had with a civil war some years back. I mean, what's your assessment of that star ranking given to Côte d'Ivoire?
I think if this, proverb is right, it might be appropriate to describe the situation that the report is trying to capture. We're talking about the land of the blind, where the one-eyed man is a king. We're talking about Africa, where there's problematic development. Practically all the indices, you hardly find consequential development progress that can measure up to other countries in Asia and the Pacific. even before you begin to talk about countries in the West, you know. Cote d'Ivoire is identified at the level of economics, but not at the level of politics, you know. I think Seychelles is identified at the level of economics, also not at the level of politics, you know. And of course, we know why Seychelles is doing well, why it probably has overtaken Mauritius, maybe because of safe environment, you know, their hospitality, potentials for tourism. And of course, a country like Rwanda, for instance, that will easily say is okay for tourism, welcoming country, very clean. We have witnessed levels of stability, but in terms of sustainability, and of course the credibility of democracy, their democracy, you still ask questions around it. So there's this you know, back and forth, you know, a conflation of method, you know, that the report used. You see some conflicting terms, you know, but of course it was also, you know, credible in terms of the many yardsticks that they deployed, so that we can have more than enough data sets, you know, to put nations into appropriate places, and in which case you'll be implicating Nigeria. On all scores, I think you will not give credit to Nigeria. Nigeria is one of those countries that came high in terms of early warning sign of danger. And of course, one reason why it is so is because of insecurity that is persisting. And the warning is, if it is not dealt with, of course, we might be headed for something graver, which we do not wish anyway. And of course, which leadership, if it is appropriate, if it is rightful, visionary, and of course with a lot of gusto, religious one at that, we can see some level of development and progress as captured in the report.
Well, on that note, gentlemen, I want to thank you very much indeed. Very interesting contributions there. Of course, the current affairs analyst and Dean of the School of Postgraduate Studies at Bayes University here in Abuja, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, and on the line from Port Harcourt, the Country Director of Amnesty International, Issa Sanusi. Thank you very much indeed.